Millionaire gave his mansion keys to homeless teen mom and sick baby. When he checked security cameras that night, he was left speechless. Thunder crashed over Fairhaven as Sarah Williams clutched her baby Noah tighter against her chest, desperately running through the pouring rain. Her worn-out sneakers splashed through puddles as she searched for shelter in the wealthy neighborhood. Noah's skin burned with fever, his tiny body shivering despite the blanket wrapped around him. "Hold on, sweetie," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Mommy's going to find us somewhere safe." At just 20 years old, she felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. Her baby boy, only 1 year old, needed his breathing medication, but they'd been turned away from the last shelter for being at capacity. Lightning illuminated an imposing mansion ahead, its gates slightly ajar. Sarah noticed a covered garden area near the side of the house. "Just a little further, Noah," she pleaded, as his breathing became more labored. The security lights suddenly flooded the garden, and alarms began blaring through the property. Inside the mansion's security room, Charles Montgomery III watched the scene unfolding on his monitors. The 68-year-old billionaire leaned forward, his hand hovering over the police alert button. But something made him pause. The young woman wasn't trying to break in. She was desperately attempting to shield her baby from the rain. Noah's coughing fit echoed through the garden's security mic. Sarah sat on a stone bench, cradling him as he struggled to breathe. "Please, God," she prayed, tears streaming down her face. "I'll do anything. Just help my baby." Charles's hand trembled as he watched. The scene stirred something deep within him, a memory of his late wife Elizabeth in their younger days, her passionate dedication to helping young mothers in crisis. His security chief's voice crackled through the intercom. "Sir, should I send the guards to remove them?" Before Charles could respond, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. On his desk lay an old letter he'd been reading earlier that day. Elizabeth's last letter to him, written just before her death 5 years ago. His eyes fixed on a line he'd dismissed as the ramblings of illness. "One day, Charles, a young mother will arrive at our home on a stormy night. When she does, remember your promise to me." The baby's coughs grew worse. On the monitor, Sarah was now performing CPR on her tiny son, her training as a nursing student evident in her precise movements. Charles watched in horror as the child's lips began turning blue. "Sir?" the security chief pressed. "The police are on standby." Charles grabbed his coat and umbrella. "Call Dr. Peterson instead," he ordered, hurrying toward the garden. "Tell him it's an emergency." As he approached, Sarah looked up in terror, clutching Noah protectively. "Please," she begged. "He needs help. I'm not trying to break in, I swear. It's all right," Charles assured her, his voice gentle as he covered them with his umbrella. "I'm calling my doctor. Let's get you both inside where it's warm." He paused, studying her face in the security lights. The resemblance to Elizabeth's old photos was uncanny. The same determined set of the jaw, the same kindness in the eyes despite desperate circumstances. Sarah hesitated, years of hard lessons making her wary of strangers, even kind-looking elderly ones. But Noah's next labored breath made the decision for her. As Charles led them toward the house, neither could have imagined how this stormy night would change not only their lives but an entire community. From the security room, the monitors captured it all, a moment of pure human compassion that would soon be tested by greed, suspicion, and the prejudices of a town not ready for change. But for now, in the midst of the storm, grace had found its way through the garden gates of Montgomery Manor. The next morning, Charles sat in his study reviewing the file his private investigator had compiled overnight about Sarah Williams. What he discovered made his heart heavy. She had been a nursing student at State University with a full scholarship, maintaining a perfect GPA while working part-time at the hospital. Everything changed when Noah was born with a severe heart condition. The insurance company had denied Noah's treatment, claiming it was a pre-existing condition. Sarah withdrew from school to work 3 jobs, trying to save money for Noah's surgery. She cleaned hospital floors during the day, waited tables at night, and sold handmade crafts on weekends. Despite her efforts, the medical bills kept mounting. "Mr. Montgomery," his assistant interrupted, holding a folder. "The board members sent this. They're concerned about your new house guests." Charles opened the folder and frowned. The board had hired investigators to dig into Sarah's past, trying to paint her as a potential scammer. They'd even photographed her at different shelters, suggesting she was running cons across the state. "There's more, sir," the assistant added nervously. "A social worker is here. She says the garden incident was reported, and she needs to evaluate if your home is suitable for a child." Charles walked to the guest house, where he found Sarah giving Noah his breathing treatment. The social worker, Ms. Parker, was already there, taking notes with a skeptical expression. "Miss Williams," Ms. Parker said, "can you explain why you were trespassing on private property last night?" "I wasn't trespassing," Sarah replied quietly, keeping her focus on Noah. "My son couldn't breathe. I had no choice." "And your previous address?" Ms. Parker pressed. "The Hope Street shelter, before they reached capacity." Sarah's voice remained steady, but her hands trembled slightly. Charles watched from the doorway, remembering something. He went to his study and returned with an old hospital volunteer badge. The photo showed a much younger Sarah working alongside Elizabeth in the pediatric ward. "I knew I recognized you," Charles said. "You worked with my wife Elizabeth before Noah was born." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Mrs. Montgomery was so kind to me. She encouraged me to apply for nursing school, helped me get the scholarship. When she got sick, I wanted to visit, but I was already struggling with Noah's treatments." Ms. Parker's expression softened slightly, but she remained professional. "Mr. Montgomery, while your intentions seem good, housing a homeless mother and sick child requires proper documentation. We'll need to conduct regular visits." As they talked, Charles noticed a newspaper on the coffee table. The headline made him wince. "Billionaire Charles Montgomery, senile or scammed?" The article questioned his mental competence, suggesting Sarah was manipulating him. Sarah saw it too. "Mr. Montgomery, I don't want to cause trouble. Maybe we should—" "You're not going anywhere," Charles interrupted firmly. "Elizabeth always said our home should be a sanctuary for those in need. I'm not letting the board or anyone else change that." Later that evening, Charles watched through the security cameras as Sarah read stories to Noah, singing softly despite her obvious exhaustion. The scene reminded him so much of Elizabeth that his eyes misted over. His phone buzzed with a message from his board chairman. "Emergency meeting tomorrow. Subject: recent erratic behavior and company liability." Charles set the phone down, his jaw set with determination. He'd made a promise to Elizabeth, and he intended to keep it, no matter what the cost. The Montgomery Industries boardroom fell silent as Charles faced his executives and lawyers. The tension was palpable as he stood at the head of the table, his voice firm despite his age. "I've made my decision. Sarah and Noah will stay in the guest house," Charles announced. "This isn't up for discussion." "Mr. Montgomery," his lead attorney interrupted, "we have serious concerns about liability. If anything happens to that child on your property—" "Charles," the board chairman leaned forward, "we're worried about you. Since Elizabeth's death, you haven't been yourself. This young woman could be taking advantage of your grief." Charles pulled out a document. "I'm offering Sarah a formal lease agreement. One condition: weekly dinners with me. I want to know the person living on my property." "A lease agreement?" The chairman scoffed. "She's homeless. How will she pay?" "She won't. But she'll earn her stay by helping restore Elizabeth's gardens." As the meeting continued, across town, a man watched the guest house through binoculars. Marcus Turner, Sarah's ex-boyfriend, had seen the newspaper articles. He smiled, sensing an opportunity. That evening, Sarah sat nervously at Charles's dining room table. The formal setting made her uncomfortable, but she was determined to prove herself trustworthy. "Why weekly dinners?" she asked, watching Noah play with his mashed potatoes. Charles set down his fork. "Because Elizabeth would have wanted to know you, and because I need to know I'm not making a mistake." Sarah straightened. "Mr. Montgomery, I understand your caution, but I'm not here to take advantage. If you want me to leave—" "Do you know why I'm doing this?" Charles interrupted. "The night Elizabeth died, I was at a board meeting. She asked me to come home, said she needed to tell me something important. I said it could wait." His voice cracked. "It couldn't wait. She died that night, alone. The nurses said her last words were about a promise I needed to keep." Before Sarah could respond, the butler entered. "Sir, there's someone at the gate demanding to see Miss Williams." On the security monitor, they saw Marcus. Sarah's face went pale. "He's Noah's father. He left when I was pregnant." Charles watched Marcus shouting at the gate. "Camera." "Should I let him in?" Sarah shook her head. "He only shows up when he wants money. Please don't let him near Noah." Charles instructed security to send Marcus away, but the man's parting words chilled them both. "You think you're safe in there, Sarah? Wait till everyone knows what you did." Later that night, Sarah tucked Noah into his new bed, his first real bed since leaving their apartment. "Thank you, God," she whispered, "for giving us shelter." Through the security cameras, Charles watched this private moment. His phone buzzed with messages from board members questioning his judgment, but his mind was made up. Something about Sarah's quiet dignity reminded him of Elizabeth's compassion for struggling mothers. But Marcus's threats lingered in the air, and the board's resistance was just beginning. Charles knew the real challenges were still to come. Spring arrived at Montgomery Manor, and with it came dramatic changes. Sarah spent her mornings transforming Elizabeth's abandoned garden, pulling weeds and planting new seeds. What started as a small project grew when she invited other mothers from her old shelter to help. "These vegetables will help feed the shelter," Sarah explained to Charles during their weekly dinner. "The mothers get job experience and their kids have a safe place to play while they work." Charles watched through his study window as a group of women tended the gardens. Their children played nearby, their laughter filling the once silent grounds. But not everyone appreciated the changes. "Mr. Montgomery," his neighbor Mrs. Harrison complained on the phone, "your property is starting to look like a community center. Our property values are at stake." Similar calls flooded in from other wealthy neighbors. Meanwhile, Noah showed significant improvement under his new treatment plan. The doctor was amazed at his progress. "His heart function is strengthening," the specialist reported during a checkup. "The medication is working better than expected." But as Noah grew stronger, darker forces gathered. Private investigators hired by the board lurked near the property, photographing everyone who entered and left. They followed the shelter mothers, documented their license plates, and compiled detailed reports. One rainy afternoon, Sarah discovered something unexpected in the mansion's attic. While storing garden tools, she found a box of Elizabeth's old diaries. She didn't read them, but brought them straight to Charles. "I found these upstairs," she said, placing them on his desk. "I thought you might want them." Charles opened the most recent diary with trembling hands. Elizabeth's last entries revealed something disturbing. She had suspected financial misconduct within the company, but died before she could investigate further. Before Charles could process this information, his security team reported an unwelcome visitor. Marcus was back, this time with a lawyer. "Sir," the head of security announced, "they're threatening to go to the press with damaging information about Miss Williams." Through the cameras, Charles watched Marcus pacing at the gate. Something about his confident smirk suggested he wasn't acting alone. Later that night, Sarah noticed a car following her during her grocery run. When she mentioned it to Charles, his face darkened. "The board's getting desperate," he said. "They've hired people to watch us. Be careful." Sarah looked out the window at the garden she'd rebuilt. Mothers from the shelter were teaching their children how to plant seeds, just as she'd taught them. The scene brought tears to her eyes. "Maybe I should leave," she suggested. "I'm causing too much trouble." "No," Charles replied firmly. "Elizabeth's garden has been empty for 5 years. Now it's alive again. Those investigators can take all the pictures they want." But as darkness fell, more suspicious cars appeared on the street. Through his security monitors, Charles watched. Men in suits taking notes, photographing license plates, following the shelter mother's home. The board was building a case, gathering ammunition. But for what? Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I know what really happened the night you left the hospital. How much is the old man paying you to keep quiet?" She deleted the message, her hands shaking. The past she'd tried so hard to escape was catching up with her, threatening the sanctuary she'd found for Noah. What she didn't know was that Charles had his own investigators working quietly, uncovering truths that would soon shake the foundations of everything they thought they knew. The Montgomery Industries boardroom buzzed with tension as executives gathered for a secret meeting. CEO Richard Bennett paced at the head of the table. "Charles has lost his grip on reality," Bennett declared. "First, he houses homeless people. Now he's turning the estate into some kind of shelter. We need to act." "The shareholders are getting nervous," added James Wilson, the chief financial officer. "Our stock dropped 5 points since this circus began." "What about the girl?" someone asked. "Our investigators found something interesting about her last night at the hospital before she became homeless." Bennett smiled. "Let's make her an offer she can't refuse. Everyone has a price." That afternoon, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. 2 executives arrived at the guest house in an expensive car. "Miss Williams," the first man said, "we represent the board. We'd like to discuss your future." He opened a briefcase. "We're prepared to offer you $500,000 to leave quietly. Enough for Noah's treatment and a fresh start." Sarah stared at the check. That amount would cover Noah's surgery and years of treatment. But something felt wrong. "Why are you really here?" she asked. "Charles Montgomery is worth billions," the second man replied. "His recent behavior concerns our shareholders. If you leave, we'll ensure Noah gets the best medical care. And if I don't?" Things could get difficult. Social services might question whether a homeless mother should have custody of a sick child. What they didn't know was that Charles was watching through the security cameras, his hands clenched as he heard every word. Sarah stood up. "Please leave. Noah and I aren't for sale." After they left, Charles reviewed the security footage again. Sarah's refusal of life-changing money moved him deeply. But worse was coming. His phone rang. It was his lawyer. "Charles, the board is filing a lawsuit. They're seeking to have you declared mentally incompetent. On what grounds?" "They claim your recent behavior shows declining judgment. They've submitted statements from neighbors, documentation of the shelter mothers, even psychological evaluations done without your knowledge." Before Charles could respond, another crisis erupted. The social worker, Ms. Parker, arrived for a surprise inspection. "We received complaints about multiple unrelated adults accessing the property," she said, taking notes. "This environment may be unsuitable for a child with serious medical needs." Sarah tried to explain about the garden program, but Ms. Parker remained skeptical. As she left, she delivered a warning. "The department will be monitoring this situation closely." That evening, Sarah discovered something in Elizabeth's diary that changed everything. A note about missing foundation funds, suspicious transfers, and board members' names circled in red. But when she went to tell Charles, she found him staring at his computer in shock. The board had leaked Elizabeth's private medical records to the press, suggesting she'd been mentally unstable in her final days, making Charles's promise to her meaningless. "They're trying to erase her legacy," Charles said, his voice breaking. Everything she believed in. Sarah placed the diary on his desk. "Maybe not everything. Look what she found." As they read together, the pieces began falling into place. The board's desperation to remove them wasn't just about Charles's recent decisions, it was about keeping buried what Elizabeth had discovered before her death. Suddenly, Noah's bedroom monitor crackled with static. Sarah rushed to check on him, but his bed was empty. "Noah?" she called out, panic rising. "Noah, where are you?" The security cameras showed no sign of the child. He had vanished during their most vulnerable moment. The hospital corridors echoed with Sarah's frantic calls as she searched for Noah. Security cameras had shown him wandering out during his usual checkup, but no one could find him. "He's never done this before," Sarah told the hospital security team. "He knows not to leave his room." Charles arrived at the hospital, his face grave. "I've got my security team reviewing all camera footage. We'll find him." As they searched, Charles finally shared the truth he'd been holding back about Elizabeth's death. "I need to tell you something," he said as they checked another corridor. "The night Elizabeth died, she wasn't just sick, she was going to expose something." Sarah stopped walking. "What do you mean?" "She found evidence of fraud in our charitable foundation. Millions meant for medical care for underprivileged families. Gone. She called me at the board meeting, saying she had proof. But His voice cracked. "I told her it could wait until morning. That's why the board is so desperate to get rid of me," Sarah realized. "They think I know something." A nurse interrupted them. "Mr. Montgomery? We found this in the chapel." She handed them a sealed envelope. Inside was a letter from Elizabeth, dated the day she died. Charles read it aloud, his hands shaking. "My dearest Charles, if you're reading this, I couldn't tell you in person. The board has been stealing from our foundation for years. The proof is in the garden shed, hidden where I used to keep my prayer journal. But more importantly, I had a vision last night. A young mother will come to us, someone who embodies everything our foundation stands for. When she arrives, protect her. She's the key to making things right. All my love, Elizabeth." Suddenly, they heard singing from the chapel. They rushed inside to find Noah, sound asleep in the front pew. "He always loved Elizabeth's hymns," Sarah whispered, lifting him gently. "Sometimes I sing them to help him sleep." Charles stared at Elizabeth's letter, then at Sarah and Noah. She knew you were coming. Somehow, she knew. Back at the mansion, they went to the garden shed. Behind a loose brick, they found a USB drive and files documenting years of financial fraud. But they weren't alone. Marcus stepped out from behind the shed. "Looking for something?" "What are you doing here?" Sarah demanded, clutching Noah. "The board sent me. They knew Elizabeth kept records out here." He pulled out his phone. "Did you know Sarah was working the night your wife died, Charles? The board has hospital records." "I was on duty in the pediatric ward," Sarah said firmly. "But you were the last person to see Elizabeth alive. The board thinks that's worth a lot of money to keep quiet." Charles stepped forward. "Are you blackmailing us?" "Just delivering a message. Drop the investigation, or Sarah's hospital records from that night go public. And trust me, they don't tell a pretty story." After Marcus left, Sarah turned to Charles, tears in her eyes. "I need to tell you what really happened that night. I was there when Elizabeth died, but not the way they're suggesting." Charles looked at the security cameras surrounding them, then at Noah sleeping in Sarah's arms. "Not here. We need somewhere safe to talk." The truth about Elizabeth's last night was about to change everything, but the press was already running headlines about a potential scandal, and the board was moving to seize control of the company. Time was running out to protect Elizabeth's legacy and their newfound family. The local news station ran a surprising story: Montgomery Manor Gardens feeding local families. The reporter stood in Elizabeth's restored garden, interviewing mothers from the shelter about their new jobs and hope for the future. "This program changed my life," one mother said, showing off the vegetables she'd grown. Miss Sarah taught us we can start over, no matter what. The positive coverage caught the attention of Fairhaven's residents. People began stopping by the gates offering to volunteer. Even Mrs. Harrison, who had complained the loudest, arrived with gardening tools. "I was wrong," she told Sarah. "This is exactly what our community needed." But the peace didn't last. During the garden's first community event, Noah collapsed while playing with other children. "He can't breathe," Sarah screamed, rushing to her son. The crowd watched in horror as Noah's lips turned blue. But instead of panic, something remarkable happened. The shelter mothers formed a human chain to keep people back, giving Sarah space to work. Mrs. Harrison called her son, a pediatrician, who lived nearby. Charles already had an ambulance on the way. "Stay with me, baby," Sarah whispered, performing CPR. "Please, stay with me." The pediatrician arrived before the ambulance, helping stabilize Noah. As they loaded him into the emergency vehicle, the gathered crowd joined hands in prayer. That evening, the hospital waiting room filled with people from the garden event. Charles watched in amazement as wealthy neighbors sat with shelter mothers, sharing coffee and concern for Noah. His phone buzzed. The board chairman. "Emergency meeting tomorrow. Subject: immediate removal of Charles Montgomery as CEO." But something had shifted in the community. When news of the board's attempt to remove Charles spread, people began sharing stories about Elizabeth's kindness and how the garden program had united the town. Local business owners who had opposed the shelter mothers now offered them jobs. The newspaper that had questioned Charles's sanity ran editorials praising his vision. "This is what Mom wanted," said Mrs. Harrison's daughter, a local council member. "A community that takes care of its own." Noah recovered quickly, stronger than ever. His doctor was amazed. "The garden work has improved his stamina," she explained. "And having a stable home, a community, it makes a difference." But dark forces were still at work. One morning, Charles found protesters at his gate, holding signs about property values and safety concerns. Their matching shirts revealed they were hired by a PR firm, the same one the board used. Sarah watched the protesters from the garden. The shelter mothers surrounded her protectively. "We're not leaving," one mother declared. "This garden saved my family. We'll stand with you." The local news returned, capturing the moment when the protesters faced an unexpected sight. Elderly neighbors, business owners, and former critics forming a human chain around the garden, protecting it. Mrs. Harrison stepped forward to address the media. "I once opposed this project. I was wrong. This garden represents the best of our community: hope, hard work, and second chances." The protesters left, but Charles knew the board wouldn't give up. They were going to try to seize control of the company to stop him from investigating the missing foundation money. That night, looking at the security cameras, he saw something that gave him hope. The garden was full of fireflies, and families from all parts of town were gathering to watch them with their children. Noah sat on a blanket with other kids, his breathing strong and steady, while parents from different worlds found common ground in the simple pleasure of a summer evening. "Elizabeth would have loved this," Sarah said softly. Charles nodded, but his relief was short-lived. Tomorrow he would face the board's attempt to take everything: the company, the foundation, and the sanctuary they'd built. The real battle was just beginning. The courtroom fell silent as Sarah took the witness stand. The board's attempt to declare Charles mentally incompetent had turned into a public hearing, with the community packing the gallery. "Miss Williams," Charles' attorney began, "please tell us about your first interaction with Mrs. Elizabeth Montgomery." Sarah's voice was clear and steady. "I met her when I was a nursing student. She found me studying during my lunch break at the hospital. Instead of eating, I was saving my lunch money for textbooks." "And what did she do?" "She created a scholarship fund for nursing students who worked at the hospital. She said investment in education was the best way to help people help themselves." The board's lawyer stood up. "Isn't it true you were working the night Mrs. Montgomery died?" "Yes," Sarah replied. "I was there." The lawyer smiled triumphantly. And isn't it true that you were the last person to see her alive? I was, and I've been afraid to tell this story, but Elizabeth deserves the truth. Sarah looked directly at Charles. That night, Elizabeth called me to her room. She gave me a file and said, "Some people will try to stop this information from getting out." Then she had a seizure. Her last words were about keeping her promise and protecting the foundation. The courtroom erupted. Charles stared at Sarah, understanding flooding his face. Bennett, the CEO, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "What happened to the file?" the judge asked. "I hid it in the hospital chapel where Elizabeth used to pray. After Noah got sick and I lost everything, I couldn't go back for it. But it's still there." Charles's attorney produced a sealed envelope. "Your Honor, we retrieved this from the hospital chapel this morning. It contains proof of systematic theft from the Montgomery Foundation, totaling millions of dollars." Bennett stood up, shouting, "This is ridiculous. She's making this up." "Order!" The judge demanded silence. "Mr. Bennett, sit down," Sarah continued. "Elizabeth told me something else that night. She said, 'One day you'll need help. When that day comes, go to Charles. He'll remember his promise.'" The judge reviewed the documents, his expression darkening. "This hearing is no longer about Mr. Montgomery's competency. Bailiff, please ensure no one leaves. We're now discussing criminal fraud." Charles stood up. "Your Honor, before we continue, I'd like to make an announcement." He faced the packed courtroom. "The Montgomery Foundation will be reestablished, bigger than before. The mansion will become a training center for people rebuilding their lives. Sarah will oversee the nursing scholarship program, continuing Elizabeth's work." Bennett laughed bitterly. "You'll destroy the company's reputation." "No," Charles replied. "We'll restore it. Elizabeth always said business success meant nothing without social responsibility." The judge called a brief recess. In the hallway, community members hugged Sarah, while police officers escorted board members to discuss ongoing investigations. Mrs. Harrison approached Charles. "The neighborhood association met yesterday. We voted unanimously to support the foundation's new mission. But the day's biggest surprise came from an unexpected source." The board's former secretary stepped forward. "I have copies," she said quietly, "of everything. Every fraudulent transfer, every falsified report. Elizabeth knew I was keeping records. She told me to wait for the right time." As Charles listened to her testimony, he watched Sarah comforting another witness, a young mother testifying about how the garden program had saved her family. The foundation's future was secure, but Charles knew the real work was just beginning. Elizabeth's vision of a community united by compassion and second chances was finally becoming reality. Outside the courtroom, Noah played with other children, his laughter echoing through the halls of justice. The American dream wasn't just about wealth, Charles realized. It was about creating opportunities for others to thrive. Construction crews transformed Montgomery Manor's East Wing into classrooms while preserving Elizabeth's personal touches. Sarah supervised the renovations, ensuring each space served both practical and emotional needs. "The computer lab will go here," she explained to Charles, pointing to the former ballroom. "And this sunroom will be perfect for childcare while mothers attend classes." Charles watched workers install the foundation's new sign, Elizabeth Montgomery Center for New Beginnings. Thanks to the recovered funds and new donations, the program was expanding faster than anyone expected. Sarah's acceptance letter to restart nursing school lay on Charles's desk. The scholarship would cover everything: tuition, books, and living expenses. "I can't believe I'm going back," Sarah said, touching the letter. "Elizabeth's scholarship brought me here the first time, and now it's happening again." But not everyone supported the changes. A group of traditional families protested at the city council meeting. "These people will bring crime to our neighborhood," one resident argued. "Our children won't be safe." Sarah stood to address them. "I was one of these people a few months ago. Now I'm returning to nursing school. The mothers in our program don't want handouts. They want opportunities to work. The council voted to approve the center's permits, but tensions remained. Some neighbors installed security cameras pointing at the manor. Others stopped speaking to Charles at church. Noah's first day at his new special needs school highlighted the divide. Some parents pulled their children away when Sarah dropped him off. The principal called an emergency meeting. Several families have concerns, she explained. Diplomatically. About a child with a heart condition? Charles asked, his voice sharp. About his background, she replied uncomfortably. But Noah surprised everyone. Despite his health challenges, he thrived in class. His story of living in the garden house fascinated his classmates. Soon, playdates were requested. The first training program launched with 20 students, former shelter residents learning computer skills, healthcare basics, and business operations. Sarah arranged for successful program graduates to mentor new students. One morning, Charles found Sarah asleep over her nursing textbooks in the library. Noah had curled up next to her with his own picture book. The security cameras captured the moment. A perfect illustration of determination and hope. More documents emerged about the board's fraud. The investigation expanded to other companies, revealing a pattern of stealing from charitable foundations. Former board members faced criminal charges. Charles testified at the trials, but his focus remained on the center. Each day brought new progress. The garden expanded into a small farm. A local restaurant chain agreed to buy their produce. Mothers who once lived in shelters earned steady paychecks. Sarah's nursing professors allowed her to complete clinical hours at the center's new medical clinic. She worked with volunteer doctors who treated residents and neighbors alike, breaking down barriers between social classes. Noah's health improved dramatically. His doctors credited the stable environment and reduced stress. He became the center's unofficial mascot, greeting new families with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how they felt. But late one night, reviewing security footage, Charles noticed something troubling. Men in suits photographing license plates, taking notes about visitors. The battle wasn't over. They're documenting everyone who comes here, Sarah observed. But why? The answer arrived in a thick envelope. Development company wanted to buy the entire block, including Montgomery Manor. Their plans showed luxury condominiums replacing the center. We knew this might happen, Charles said, studying the offer. That's why we need to move faster. Sarah looked at him questioningly. It's time to expand, he explained. Not just here, but in other cities. Elizabeth's vision was never meant for just one community. The security cameras kept recording, capturing both progress and threats, hope and resistance. The American dream was transforming, one family at a time, but powerful forces still stood in their way. The center's first graduation ceremony filled the manor's renovated ballroom. 20 women in business attire received their certification diplomas, their children cheering from the audience. A year ago, I was sleeping in my car, the class speaker shared. Today, I'm starting my new job at the hospital. This program didn't just teach us skills, it gave us our dignity back. Sarah watched proudly from the back, taking a brief break from her nursing studies. Her own finals were approaching, but she wouldn't miss this moment. The success caught national attention. A major news network interviewed Charles about expanding the program nationwide. But during the live broadcast, something went wrong. Charles clutched his chest mid-sentence, his face pale. The cameras kept rolling as he collapsed. "Call 911. Sarah rushed to his side, her nursing training taking over. She checked his pulse, started chest compressions. "Stay with us, Charles, please." Noah watched from the doorway, tears streaming down his face. Is Grandpa Charles going to be okay? The ambulance seemed to take forever. Sarah continued CPR, remembering everything she'd learned. The news crew captured it all. The desperation, the determination, the prayers. At the hospital, doctors confirmed a major heart attack. While Charles lay unconscious, more trouble arrived. Representatives from Vista Development, the company trying to buy the property, appeared with legal documents. Mr. Montgomery never filed the center's permanent registration, their lawyer announced. Without his signature, the property reverts to the corporation. We have buyers ready. Sarah thought quickly. Check the security footage from his office. He signed everything last week. But when they reviewed the tapes, the signed papers weren't on his desk. Someone had removed them. Meanwhile, Noah's doctor arrived with surprising news. His latest tests are remarkable. His heart function is almost normal. Whatever you're doing at that center, keep doing it. Sarah split her time between hospital shifts, studying for finals, and fighting to save the center. The graduates rallied around her, using their new skills to organize community support. Charles regained consciousness after 3 days. His first words, "Did they get the papers?" Sarah shook her head. "They're missing. Vista Development is moving to take over." "Third drawer," Charles whispered, "behind Elizabeth's picture." Back at the manor, Sarah found a sealed envelope. Inside were not only the registration papers, but evidence that Vista Development was connected to the former board members. They're still trying to destroy Elizabeth's work, Sarah realized. She rushed the documents to the judge who had handled the fraud case. Within hours, Vista's takeover was blocked, but Charles remained weak. The doctors recommended reduced stress, less involvement in the foundation. "I need to step back," he admitted to Sarah. "The center needs younger leadership. We'll figure it out together," she promised. "You taught me that family means never giving up on each other." That evening, Sarah studied for her nursing finals at Charles's bedside while Noah read him stories. The hospital security camera recorded their makeshift family moment. A week later, Charles watched via FaceTime as Sarah received her nursing certification. Noah held the phone so his grandpa could see everything. "Elizabeth would be so proud," Charles said, "of both of you." The development company made one final attempt, offering Sarah $1 million to support their takeover. She didn't even look at the check. "This isn't about money," she told them. "It's about keeping promises and honoring legacies." The security cameras kept rolling, capturing moment after moment of lives being rebuilt. The American dream wasn't in the luxury condos Vista wanted to build. It was in the faces of people discovering their own strength, their own worth. Charles recovered slowly but steadily, inspired by each new success story from the center. The family they'd built was stronger than any corporate takeover attempt. But the biggest challenges and revelations were still to come. Sarah's nursing school graduation ceremony was held in the hospital auditorium where she first met Elizabeth years ago. Charles, now recovered enough to attend, sat proudly in the front row with Noah. "Sarah Williams," the dean announced, graduating with highest honors. As Sarah accepted her diploma, the audience erupted in cheers. The entire first row was filled with graduates from the center's program, all wearing their work uniforms. Nurses' aides, medical assistants, office managers. But the celebration was interrupted by breaking news. Federal agents had arrested the former board members and Vista Development executives. The charges: conspiracy, fraud, and attempted property theft. They weren't just stealing from one foundation, the prosecutor explained to reporters. This was a nationwide scheme targeting charitable organizations. Charles received a call from Elizabeth's former secretary. "There's something you need to see," she said. Elizabeth left a safety deposit box. The key is hidden in her garden diary. In the box, they found more than financial records. There was a letter addressed to Sarah, dated just days before Elizabeth died. "Dear Sarah," it read, "if you're reading this, you fulfilled the vision I had. I watched you working double shifts to pay for school, never losing your compassion. When you told me you were pregnant, I knew you'd need help someday. Charles will be that help, and you'll help him remember why we started this foundation. Take care of each other." Sarah's hands trembled. She knew. Somehow she knew everything that would happen. The foundation's success attracted national attention. Other cities requested guidance to replicate the program. Charles watched with pride as Sarah presented their model at a national healthcare conference. Noah, now completely healthy, became the center's best advertisement. He led tours for visitors, explaining how the garden helped him get stronger. His school principal nominated him for a community service award. But one final threat emerged. An anonymous source leaked Sarah's old hospital records to the media, trying to discredit her leadership. The records showed Sarah had been investigated for prescriptions missing during her student rotation, the same night Elizabeth died. What they didn't show was Elizabeth requesting those medications for terminal patients who couldn't afford them. Instead of hiding, Sarah called a press conference. Elizabeth Montgomery taught me that rules without compassion aren't justice. She used her own money to help dying patients. I helped her, and I'd do it again. The public response was overwhelming. Other nurses came forward with similar stories about Elizabeth's secret generosity. The investigation was dropped. Charles made it official. Sarah would be the foundation's new director. The security cameras captured the moment he handed her the keys to the manor, not as a guest this time, but as his successor. "Elizabeth chose you long ago," he said. "I was just catching up to her wisdom." That evening, the first class of nurse graduates from the center's program received their certifications. Sarah, now their instructor, presented each diploma personally. Looking out at the crowd, she saw the American dream being redefined. It wasn't about getting rich quick or climbing social ladders. It was about lifting others while rising yourself. The security cameras recorded it all. Success stories, second chances, lives transformed. But they also caught a quiet moment later that night. Sarah and Noah placing fresh flowers at Elizabeth's garden memorial, while Charles watched from his study window. The family they'd built wasn't traditional, but neither was the path that brought them together. Elizabeth's legacy lived on in every person who found hope within those gates. But there was one final surprise still waiting to be discovered in Elizabeth's papers. A revelation that would complete their journey in an unexpected way. 3 years after that stormy night in the garden, Montgomery Manor buzzed with activity. The Elizabeth Montgomery Foundation had grown beyond anyone's expectations, with sister centers opening in 5 other states. The security cameras that once watched for intruders now captured daily miracles. Mothers graduating from training programs, children growing stronger in the gardens, families rebuilding their lives. Sarah's office, once Elizabeth's private study, had become command central for the foundation's expanding operations. She reviewed applications from other cities while monitoring Noah's soccer practice through the window. "Mom," Noah called out, waving from the field. "Did you see my goal?" At 7 years old, Noah showed no signs of his former health struggles. His doctors used his case to encourage other families facing similar diagnoses. Charles, now 81 but still sharp, spent his mornings mentoring students in the business training program. He loved sharing Elizabeth's vision with each new class. "Success isn't about what you own," he often said. "It's about what you give back." The morning mail brought an unexpected package from Elizabeth's lawyer. Inside was a sealed envelope with instructions to open it on this specific date. "I found this while organizing Elizabeth's final papers," the lawyer's note explained. She was very clear about when it should be delivered. Sarah called Charles to her office. Together, they opened Elizabeth's last letter. "My dearest Charles and Sarah," it began. "If you're reading this, 3 years have passed since you found each other. I'm sure the foundation has grown, and I'm equally sure forces tried to stop it. They failed because love is stronger than greed. But there's something you both need to know. Sarah, your mother was my student nurse during my first cancer treatment 21 years ago. She was pregnant with you, working extra shifts to save for your future. When complications arose, I promised to watch over her baby if anything happened to her. I lost track of you after your mother died, but I never forgot. When you appeared in my hospital years later as a nursing student, I knew God had brought you back to us. I couldn't tell you then. You needed to find your own path. Charles, remember when I said I couldn't have children? That wasn't entirely true. I chose not to, because God showed me I would be a mother in a different way. My legacy isn't just the foundation. It's the family we all became. The security cameras will show you something tonight at midnight. Don't miss it. All my love, Elizabeth. Sarah and Charles sat in stunned silence. The connection they'd felt, the way Elizabeth had prepared everything, it all made sense now. At midnight, they gathered in the security room. The cameras showed something extraordinary. Hundreds of fireflies filled Elizabeth's garden, just like the night Sarah and Noah first arrived. But as they watched, the lights formed a pattern. Look, Noah pointed at the screen. They're making a heart. The cameras captured their tears, their laughter, their realization that Elizabeth's hand had guided them from the beginning. The next morning, major news networks announced the Foundation's latest initiative: affordable medical housing facilities near major hospitals, helping families stay together during long-term treatments. This was Elizabeth's ultimate dream, Charles told reporters. Healthcare with humanity. Sarah led the cameras through the manor, now a living testament to second chances. The ballroom hosted job fairs and training sessions. The kitchen provided culinary career training. The gardens fed local food banks. Every security camera tells a story, Sarah explained, of someone finding their strength, their purpose, their family. The reporters noticed Noah giving tours to new families, showing them his old room in the garden house. This is where our story started, he told them proudly. Mom says it's where we found our miracle. Charles watched from his study as Sarah handled the interviews. She'd grown from a desperate young mother into a confident leader, yet maintained the same compassion that first drew Elizabeth to her. That evening, after the reporters left, they gathered in the garden. The security cameras recorded their private celebration, 3 generations of an unconventional family, united by one woman's vision of love extending beyond blood ties. To Elizabeth, Charles raised his glass, who saw the future and prepared the way. To second chances, Sarah added. To our family, Noah exclaimed. The cameras kept rolling as night fell, capturing the fireflies returning to the garden. But they weren't just lights now. They were reminders that magic still exists, that prayers get answered, that the American dream isn't about wealth or status, but about having the chance to lift others while rising yourself. The story of Montgomery Manor spread across the country, inspiring other communities to open their hearts and gates. The security cameras that once witnessed Sarah and Noah's desperate arrival now recorded countless similar transformations. Elizabeth's final prophecy had come true. Love had proven stronger than greed, compassion had defeated prejudice, and family had been redefined by the power of giving second chances. As Sarah made her final rounds that night, checking on new residents in the garden house, she smiled at the security cameras. From somewhere, she was sure Elizabeth was watching, proud of the legacy that grew from one simple act of kindness on a stormy night. The American dream hadn't died. It had evolved. It lived in every person who found hope within these gates, in every family rebuilt, in every life transformed. And it all started with a mother's love, extending beyond time and even death, to create a miracle no one could have predicted, but everyone needed to witness. The security cameras would keep recording night after night as new stories unfolded. But this story of Sarah, Noah, Charles, and Elizabeth's enduring love would forever remain the heart of Montgomery Manor, proof that the greatest gifts often come disguised as moments of desperation, and that true wealth lies not in what we possess, but in what we give to others. The Foundation's impact continued to grow in ways even Elizabeth couldn't have foreseen. One morning, Sarah received a call from the White House. The First Lady wanted to visit Montgomery Manor and discuss implementing the program nationally. During the preparations for the visit, Sarah discovered an old photo album in Elizabeth's closet. Inside were pictures of her mother as a young nurse, her pregnant belly visible beneath her uniform, standing next to Elizabeth. The inscription read, "Mary Williams and me, welcoming a new generation of caregivers." Sarah shared the photos with Charles. My mom died thinking she'd failed me, she said softly. She never knew her own legacy would help save Noah's life. The White House visit became a turning point. The First Lady announced a national initiative based on the Montgomery model, with federal funding to support similar centers across America. Sarah was appointed to lead the implementation committee. Noah, now thriving in second grade, gave the First Lady a tour of his garden. "This is where sick kids come to get stronger," he explained. "Just like I did." The security cameras captured a touching moment when a new mother arrived at the gates, clutching a sick baby, just as Sarah had done years ago. But this time Sarah was there to welcome her personally. "I know exactly how you feel," Sarah told her. "Let me show you where your journey begins." Charles watched the scene from his study, remembering that stormy night that changed everything. The cameras now showed a different story. Hope replacing desperation, community defeating isolation, love conquering fear. The foundation established a scholarship in Mary Williams' name, specifically for single mothers pursuing nursing degrees. Sarah presented the first award at a ceremony attended by hundreds. "My mother worked extra shifts while pregnant to give me a better life," Sarah shared. She never knew that her sacrifice would create a ripple effect, helping countless other mothers do the same for their children. The Manor's security system, once meant to keep people out, now documented the daily transformation of lives. Each camera told stories of redemption: addicts finding sobriety, homeless families rebuilding, children healing. One evening, going through more of Elizabeth's papers, Charles found her original mission statement for the foundation. The final line read, "Love is the only investment that never fails." The garden expanded into a full working farm, providing job training and fresh food for local shelters. Noah's elementary school started sending students there for science classes, breaking down social barriers early. During that year's Christmas celebration, something remarkable happened. Former residents, who had succeeded, returned in record numbers, each bringing resources to help new families. The security cameras captured the perfect circle: those who had received help now reaching back to offer it to others. Sarah established a new program called Elizabeth's Angels, a network of successful graduates who mentored new arrivals. The ripple effect of kindness that Elizabeth started had become a wave of transformation. As Charles watched the foundation flourish under Sarah's leadership, he finally understood Elizabeth's greatest gift. She hadn't just saved one family on a stormy night. She had created a living model of what community could be. The security cameras continued their silent witness, recording not just the big moments, but the quiet victories. A child's first steps after illness, a mother's tears of joy at graduation, a family's first night of peaceful sleep in their own beds. Montgomery Manor had become more than a refuge. It was a beacon of hope, a testament to the enduring power of love, and proof that the American dream wasn't just about individual success, but about lifting others as you rise. The story continues through every life touched by the foundation, through every family restored, through every dream rekindled. And somewhere, Elizabeth watches through heaven's own cameras, smiling at how one act of kindness grew into a movement of love that changed not just a community, but a nation. For in the end, the greatest security isn't found in cameras or gates or walls, but in the bonds we forge when we open our hearts to others. And that is Elizabeth Montgomery's true legacy. A legacy that lives on in every life transformed at Montgomery Manor, in every heart touched by hope, in every dream reborn through the power of unconditional love. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you do if you were in Charles's position that stormy night? Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories that remind us of the power of faith, family, and second chances. Remember, sometimes the greatest miracles start with a simple act of kindness. Hit that notification bell to never miss a story that could change your life, just like Elizabeth changed Sarah's with one decision. Life's greatest gifts often arrive in moments of our deepest desperation. Keep your heart open. Your miracle might be just around the corner.